Hello and welcome back. So this video we're now going to cover bacterial skin infections. In the previous video we went over viral infections with herpes simplex virus and chickenpox with varicella zoster as our viruses. So again, I'm only picking a few bacterial skin infections to go over, and I just want to kind of go over the bacteria that cause the infections and the treatments associated with it. All right, because we're talking now about bacterial infections, our treatments typically are going to be antibiotics. Depending on the lesion, either topical, meaning it's applied to the outside of the skin, or systemic with oral antibiotics. All right? Our viral infections, the treatments associated with those were either it ran its course or you gave an antiviral of some sort, like acyclovir was one of the examples. With bacterial infections, I've got 3 specifically we're going to go over. All right, we're going to go over, the first one is Pedigo. And it just kind of sounds neat to say Pedigo. But typically the bacterial agents associated with these, well, maybe I'll make that an A since I've got a 1 up there, are going to be Streptococcus or Staphylococcus. All right. And with the population, Staphylococcus, this is the one that we talked about way back with bacterial infections. MRSA is a type of, oh, I spelled that wrong. Goodness, you would think I would get that right. It's okay. We'll just erase it. MRSA is a type of staph infection. In this case, it's Staphylococcus aureus. And the MR in this case refers to methicillin resistant. This tells you it's an antibiotic resistant strain, okay? So if it's an antibiotic resistant strain, treatment becomes much, much more difficult, all right? Because there are a limited set of antibiotics that will respond to now a MRSA type infection, okay? But typically Pedigo is an acute infection, acute meaning it comes on fairly quickly. It also tends to be has yellowish pustules on the skin. Always a fun word to say, pustules. So it kind of looks like an extensive acne infection, but it's not acne. The Pedigo is either a strep or more commonly a staph infection beneath the layers of the skin. All right. Typically, with Pedigo, it's treated with topical antibiotics unless it's a very severe outbreak. If it's a severe outbreak, then you're going to go oral antibiotics with Pedigo. Okay? So again, bacterial, easily treatable. And because, you know, we had a sexually transmitted virus that we talked about with the herpes simplex virus, we've got a sexually transmitted bacteria. All right, and that bacteria that we're going to cover next causes syphilis. And this one is, I need to check my spelling on this one. Pneumonium pallidum. That's the bacteria that causes syphilis, all right? And this one is kind of unique because this particular bacteria is a spirochete, so it's spiral in shape. And with syphilis, the disease progresses from primary infection to a secondary infection to a tertiary infection, if not treated, okay? Primary and secondary infections, not fatal, all right? Not pleasant, and it can, the individual can transmit the bacteria to another individual, so it is very contagious at those stages. Primary infection is identified by the presence of a canker sore. All right, and in the PowerPoints, I've got an image of a canker sore in the PowerPoint there. It's an open lesion that is found typically on the genitals, all right? That's the primary infection. Now with syphilis, this is kind of an odd bacterium. The bacteria can kind of go dormant a little bit. So you may have this canker sore that shows up, it goes away and you think, oh, well, whatever it is gone. It's not gone. What ends up happening, that bacteria travels and it ends up causing a rash across the body. Most commonly, secondary syphilis, it'll be on the hands and the feet. And again, in the secondary stage, that's highly contagious, all right? Not often seen with today's availability of antibiotics, okay? So primary and secondary syphilis. Penicillin tends to be the antibiotic of choice for this particular infection. Now, if the individual is allergic to penicillin, there can be other antibiotics that are given. They don't tend to be quite as effective as penicillin, all right? So we've got a progression here, primary with the canker sore, secondary with the rash. Tertiary now, this is the latent portion. Oops, that's not spelled right either. Let's just erase with the fingers. All right. If you follow at all Al Capone with the mob, Al Capone had syphilis. He refused to believe that he had syphilis, and it was syphilis that ultimately ended up in his death, is what ended up killing him. The tertiary syphilis can cause heart damage. And very often it's that damage to the heart that ends up being lethal for the patient, okay? But with tertiary syphilis, an individual can live decades, which is what Al Capone did, with tertiary syphilis. But that bacteria over those decades is what's causing damage to the heart, and that's what ends up being, with syphilis being fatal, all right? So there's a progression with syphilis. Treponema pallidum is the bacteria, so know the bacteria that causes it, know the progression, know what's associated with each of the three stages, okay? I've got one more bacterial infection, and I don't really want to go to a new video for it, so we're just going to take a moment here. We'll erase our Pedigo. And we'll cover the third type of infection. that affects skin, all right, specifically. And that last type bacteria is going to be leprosy. This is caused by oh, goodness. A mycobacterium. Specifically, it's Microbacterium leprae. So in the name there, sorry for the squeak, it tells you which type of disease it's causing. So Mycobacterium leprae causes leprosy. You may have heard, like back in the 1920s, 1930s, there used to be leper colonies around the world, all right? There was one in Hawaii, and if you have to be sent somewhere to live out your life, Hawaii might not be a bad place. But with the leper colonies, the individuals who were there were kind of shunned from society. Because the infection causes such damage to the skin, it can cause some facial deformities. It can cause hand and foot deformities. I don't know that I spelled that right, but Molokai was the island that was associated with the leper colony in Hawaii. All right. Typically, with leprosy, again, at the time in the 1920s and 1930s, they did not understand or did not know that this was caused by an infectious agent. But it causes great deformity if the infection occurs in the face. More commonly, it's also associated in the hands and the feet. But again, because it is a bacterial infection, now we can treat leprosy with antibiotics. So leper colonies don't exist anymore, all right? One of the key things associated with leprosy that's a little bit different from syphilis and it's different from Pedigo, there's a genetic component to, I like the pink marker, but it squeaks an awful lot. There's a genetic component associated with leprosy. So it's a little bit different. It's not well understood what exactly the genetics is between leprosy and Mycobacterium leprae, but it does tend to run in families. Now, it could also be proposed that, well, if it runs in families, families live in close proximity, and that's because it's a contagious disease. But there are members of the family who don't end up with leprosy, even though they live in close contact with the individual. So there's a genetic component associated with leprosy that's not well understood, okay? But I do want you to know the infectious agent. Leprosy also is referred to as Hansen's disease. Again, for the individual who described the initial outbreaks or described the initial symptoms associated with leprosy, okay? Does respond well to antibiotics. There can be associated with a Mycobacterium leprae infection. There may need to be some corrective surgeries, especially if the infection is hands and feet, to correct some malformations associated with that, okay? So 3 bacterial infections: Pedigo, syphilis, leprosy. If you have any questions, please let me know.